You want to know the strangest thing about that night? It wasn't the engine. It wasn't the smell of smoke creeping into the cockpit, or the way the whole airframe started shaking like a washing machine with a brick in it. No, the strangest thing was how quiet it got. Not in the cabin was a nightmare. I mean the radio. The whole frequency, all those voices that never shut up, every controller and every other crew chattering away over the northern approach, they all went silent, like the whole sky was holding its breath. And the only voice left was his. The man we used to laugh at. Let me back up, because if I just start at the engine, you'll miss the part that matters. You'll miss why a room full of grown pilots, men and women who'd flown into war zones and through hurricanes and over oceans wider than your imagination, ended up looking at the floor in shame the next morning. To understand that, you have to understand who he was first, or who we thought he was. His real name was Idris Kamara. But nobody called him that. I started at Northwind Regional in the spring of 2014. I was 26, fresh off a turboprop contract up in the cold northern routes, and I thought I knew everything. That's the thing about young pilots. You get a few hundred hours under you and you start walking around like you invented the sky. I wore my hours like a watch I wanted everyone to see. Northwind wasn't glamorous. We flew these old workhorse jets, solid airplanes, but tired ones, the kind that had been bought second-hand and patched up more times than anyone wanted to admit. Short hops, regional stuff. You do 4 legs in a day sometimes, little airports where the terminal was basically a shed with a coffee machine. The pay was bad. The schedules were worse. But it was flying, and flying was all any of us wanted, so we put up with it. The crew room was in the back of an old hangar building near Gate 12. Concrete floor. A couch that somebody's grandmother had probably owned in 1970. A fridge that hummed too loud and a whiteboard with the duty roster scrawled across it in marker that never quite erased all the way, so there were always ghost names underneath the new ones. That room is where I first heard the name. Falcon. I remember one of the senior captains saying it. A big guy named Petrov, built like a fridge himself, with a laugh that filled the whole room. He was reading the roster and he saw a name and he just snorted. "Oh, look who we've got this week," he said. "The Falcon." And everyone laughed. I didn't get the joke, so I asked. Petrov turned to me with this grin. "You haven't met Idris yet, oh kid. Oh, you're in for a treat." Here's what they told me about him. In those first few weeks in little pieces, the way you collect a story without ever meaning to. They said he was slow. Not slow in the head, careful, almost annoyingly so. The kind of pilot who'd run a checklist like it was sacred scripture, every line, every time, no matter how many thousands of times he'd done it before. The kind of guy who'd walk the entire aircraft on his pre-flight even when the ground crew swore up and down they'd already done it. The kind who'd delay a departure 2 minutes because something about a reading didn't sit right with him, and then it would always turn out to be nothing, and the whole crew would be late for their connection, and everyone would grumble. They said he never raised his voice, never told a story in the crew room, never joined the after-work beers. He'd just nod, finish his coffee, wash his own cup, actually wash it, put it back on the shelf, and go home to wherever he went home to. Nobody really knew. He kept to himself like a man guarding something. And then there was the nickname. Falcon wasn't a compliment. That's what I have to make clear. When the other pilots said it, they said it the way you'd say it about a kid who insists he's a superhero. There was a story behind it, and like all the best cruel stories, nobody could quite agree on the details. The version Petrov liked best went like this. Years back on some long layover, the crew had been killing time and somebody had asked Idris why he flew. Why he'd given up, because apparently he'd given up something to be here, some better life to fly tired old jets between nowhere towns. And Idris, who never talked, had talked. He'd said that when he was a boy back home, he used to watch the Falcons. How they'd hang in the wind, dead still, wings out, riding a current you couldn't even see. Patient, reading the air. And then, only when everything was exactly right, they'd fold and drop and strike. He'd said that's what he wanted to be like in the cockpit, patient, reading the air, ready. And the crew had laughed at him. Of course they had. Picture it. A room full of cynical, exhausted, underpaid pilots and this quiet man earnestly comparing himself to a bird of prey. They laughed until their eyes watered. And the name stuck the way the cruelest names always do because it had a barb in it. Every time you said it, you were reminding him. You told us you were special, and you're not. You're just the slow guy who washes his coffee cup. The Falcon. I'm ashamed to tell you I laughed too. The first time. I laughed because everyone was laughing and I was 26 and I wanted to belong. That's the whole ugly truth of it. I didn't even know the man and I laughed at him to fit in. I flew with him for the first time about a month into the job. I'd been hoping I wouldn't. The young guys traded shifts to avoid getting paired with him, the way school kids avoid the unpopular kid at lunch. But the roster is the roster, and one gray morning my name was up there next to his. A 2-day pairing. 4 legs out, 4 legs back, an overnight in a town so small the hotel and the gas station were the same building. I walked into the crew room dreading it. He was already there. Of course he was, always early. He was sitting at the little table with his charts spread out, actual paper charts, even though we had the tablets by then and a cup of coffee gone cold beside him. He looked up when I came in. I want to describe him to you properly because the picture in your head is probably wrong. He wasn't some frail old man. He was maybe 50, lean, with close-cropped gray hair and these very steady dark eyes. His hands were the thing you noticed. Big, calm hands, the kind that never seemed to be in a hurry, that did everything deliberately, like each motion had been thought about in advance. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but gentle, and he held my eyes for just a second longer than was comfortable, like he was reading me. "You're the new first officer," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir, Idris is fine." A pause, or whatever they're calling me this week. And there it was, he knew. Of course he knew. A man like that always knows what they say about him. He just decided long ago not to let it touch him. He said it without bitterness, almost gently, and I felt my face go hot. "Idris," I said, "I'm Marco." "I know who you are, Marco." A small smile there and gone. "You've got good hands on the controls and a bad habit of skipping the bottom of the checklist when you think nobody's watching." I froze. He'd flown a single jump seat sector behind me, weeks earlier, observing. I'd forgotten he was even there. And he'd seen it. The exact corner I cut. The one I thought nobody had ever noticed. I started. "Relax," he said. "I'm not writing you up. I'm telling you because nobody else will and because someday it'll matter." He went back to his charts. "Now sit down. We've got weather building up north and I want to walk you through how I want to handle it." That was the first morning. And I'll be honest with you, I spent most of it annoyed. He was so slow. He briefed everything twice. He asked me questions I thought were beneath me. What's our diversion if the visibility drops at the destination? What's the minimum fuel before you make me turn around? At what point do you call it? On and on. I answered through gritted teeth, thinking about how the other guys would just fly the plane and tell stories and let me do my job. But here's the thing I noticed by the end of that first day, somewhere over the gray hills as the light died. The man flew beautifully. Not flashy, never flashy. But when we hit that weather up north, and we did, a nasty band of it, the kind that throws the airplane around and turns approaches into a fistfight, he was already 3 steps ahead of it. Everything we'd briefed, every what if he'd drilled into me that I'd resented, it all just appeared exactly when we needed it. The diversion fuel he'd insisted on. The alternate he'd already loaded. The way he'd had me brief the landing twice, so that, when the moment came, and the runway lights swam up out of the murk, my hands knew what to do before my brain caught up. We landed soft as a whisper, on a runway you could barely see. And he just nodded. "Good," he said, "that's the job." I sat there in the dark cockpit with my heart still going, and I thought, for the first time, that maybe the joke wasn't on him. But I was 26, and the next day we were back in the crew room with the others, and Petrov did his impression, the wings, the hovering, the "I am the Falcon," and the whole room cracked up, and I laughed along again. Because that's who I was then. A man brave enough to land in the weather and too much of a coward to stop laughing at a good man in a break room. It's a strange thing to carry that. I've carried it 20 years now. Let me tell you about the others, because you need to know them to understand what came later and what it cost them. There was Petrov, the big captain with the big laugh, the ringleader of it really, the one who kept the nickname alive year after year. He was a good pilot, Petrov, genuinely good, with thousands of hours and a confidence that filled the cockpit. But it was a loud confidence, the kind that's never had to be quiet and wonder if it was wrong. There was Hale, younger, sharp, ambitious, the kind who was already talking about the big carriers, the wide-body jobs, the international routes. He flew like he was always being watched by someone important. Fast hands, fast decisions. He thought Idris was a relic. "That's not how the new jets fly, old man," he said once, right to Idris's face, after Idris suggested he was being a little quick on a configuration. Idris just looked at him for a long moment and said, "The jet doesn't know it's new." Nobody understood what he meant at the time. There was Danny, first officer, my age, my friend, the only one who never quite joined in on the Falcon stuff but never stood up against it either. She'd just go quiet when it started. I used to think that made her better than me. Now I think we were exactly the same. Silent is its own kind of laughing. And there was the chief pilot, Brandt, who ran the operation. Brandt liked Petrov and Hale because they got the job done fast and never delayed a departure. He didn't like Idris because Idris cost him minutes, and minutes cost money, and money was the only language Brandt was fluent in. There'd been talk, Danny told me this in a low voice one night, that Brandt wanted Idris gone, wanted to push him to early retirement, said he was too cautious, too slow, not the image we want. Brandt actually said that once out loud in a meeting, not the image. The image. I think about that a lot now too. So that was the world. That was Northwind Regional in the spring and summer of that year. A tired airline, tired airplanes, a crew room full of laughter that had a cruel edge to it, and one quiet man at the center of the joke who washed his coffee cup and flew like an angel and never said a word in his own defense. It went on like that for months. I flew with Idris maybe a dozen more times over that stretch, and every single time I learned something I didn't know I needed, and every single time I went back to the crew room and let them say Falcon and never said a word. I keep coming back to that, the not saying. We tell ourselves the moment of courage will come obvious and loud, like in the movies, that we'll know when it's time to stand up, and we'll stand. But that's not how it works. The chance comes quiet, 100 small times, in break rooms and over coffee, and we let it pass every time because standing up is awkward and laughing along is easy. And then one night the chance comes loud, comes screaming, comes with smoke and fire and the radio going silent, and by then it's far, far too late to take any of the small ones back. That night came in October. It came on a flight I almost wasn't on. I was supposed to be off. I'd swapped a shift to go to a friend's wedding, and then the wedding got postponed, and so there I was the night before, calling the scheduler, asking if anything was open. There was. A late evening leg up north and back, weather forecast getting ugly. The first officer who'd been rostered had called in sick. The captain was Idris. "You sure you want this one?" the scheduler asked me. "Weather's turning, and you know who the captain is." "I know who the captain is," I said. "I'll take it." And I remember, I swear to you I remember, there was a half second where something in me said don't. Not fear of the weather, something else. A feeling like a cold draft from a door you didn't know was open. I almost listened to it. I didn't. I drove to the airport that evening under a sky the color of a bruise, with the wind already picking up, already throwing the first fat drops of rain against my windshield. And I had no idea, none of us had any idea, that within a few hours, every single person who'd ever laughed at the name Falcon was going to be listening to that man's voice as if their lives depended on it. Because they would. The airport at night has a feeling to it that the daytime never has. In the day it's all rush and noise, families dragging suitcases, kids crying, announcements over the speakers, the smell of bad coffee everywhere. But late at night, after the last big departures, it empties out. The cleaners come through with their machines. Half the lights go off in the terminal to save money. And the people who are left, the gate agents, the ground crew, the last few passengers, they all start talking quieter, like they're in a library or a church. Like the building itself is tired and wants to sleep. That's the airport I walked into that October night. The rain had really started by then. Not the soft kind. The kind that comes sideways and hits the big terminal windows in waves, so the glass looks like it's underwater. You could hear the wind even inside, a low moan in the rafters of the building, and every now and then a gust would hit and the whole structure would seem to lean into it. I got to the crew room and Idris was already there, naturally. He had the weather packet spread out on the table, the paper kind plus the tablet, both side by side. He was studying it the way some men study a chessboard, leaning over it, completely still, only his eyes moving. He didn't look up when I came in. "Marco," he said. "Idris, you looked at this yet?" "On my phone, driving over. Looks rough up north." "Rough?" He said the word like he was testing it for weight. "Yeah, rough." He tapped one of the charts with a big finger, "but not why I'm worried." I came and stood over his shoulder. I didn't see anything that should worry a man more than the obvious, the front coming through, the winds, the icing levels. What am I missing? He pointed at the timing. The front's faster than they forecast this morning. They haven't updated the picture, but look, he showed me the satellite loop on the tablet, the great spiral of it wheeling down from the north. It's already further south than this packet says it should be. By the time we're up there where they're telling us it'll be a band, it'll be a wall, and the wind's aloft. He shook his head slowly. I don't like the winds aloft. I'll be honest. Part of me, the 26-year-old part, the part that wanted to get the flight done and get to the overnight and sleep, heard all of this as Idris being Idris. Cautious, slow, finding the cloud in every silver lining. There's a thing that happens to you when someone is careful all the time. You stop being able to tell the difference between a real warning and just their nature. You start to treat the caution like background noise. Like the hum of that fridge in the crew room that nobody heard anymore. So I said a little too casually, "You want a delay?" He looked up at me then, and there was something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not fear. Idris didn't do fear. It was more like sadness almost. The look of a man who's seen a thing happen before and is watching it set up to happen again. "No," he said, "we're inside our numbers, just." He folded the paper chart very precisely along its old creases. "But I want you sharp tonight, Marco, not relaxed, sharp. From the walk around all the way to the gate at the other end. Can you do that for me?" "Yeah," I said, "course." He held my eyes for that one extra second again, the way he had the first day. "I mean it. I want you to fly tonight like something's going to go wrong, because the night you fly like that is the night you're ready when it does." I nodded. I even meant it a little. But I didn't understand it. Not really. You can't understand a sentence like that until you've lived the other side of it. He was handing me 20 years of something, and I was taking it like a man takes a coat he doesn't think he'll need. The walk around was miserable. It's never fun in weather you're out on the ramp with a flashlight, soaked through in about 4 minutes, the wind trying to tear the inspection covers out of your hands. But Idris did the full one anyway. The full one. He always did. While the ground crew huddled under the wing trying to stay dry, he went around the whole aircraft, slow, methodical, that flashlight beam crawling over every surface. The leading edges, the static ports, down on one knee to look up into the wheel wells. Up close to the engines, both of them, the beam moving over the fan blades, the cowling, the spinner. I stood with him, mostly because it would have looked bad not to. I was cold and I wanted it over. And then he stopped. He was at the right engine, the number 2 on the co-pilot's side. He'd gone still. The flashlight beam was holding on one spot on the cowling, low down, near the back. He stood there so long that the lead ground guy came over, shouting over the wind. "Everything good, Captain?" Idris didn't answer right away. He reached up and ran his big hand along a seam in the cowling. Then he brought his fingers down and looked at them under the light. "What's this?" he said, not really a question. I came over. There was a faint dark staining along the lower edge of the cowling, a thin smear of something hard to see in the rain. Could have been anything. Old hydraulic gunk. Road grime. Almost. These jets pick up all kinds of muck. I'd have walked right past it. I had walked right past it 2 seconds earlier. "Looks like old residue," the ground guy said. "It's been in maintenance. They cleaned it last week, probably just." "When did they clean it?" Idris said. "I dunno, Tuesday. It's nothing, Captain, honest. Logbook's clean." Idris stood there in the rain. Water was running off the brim of his cap, off his nose. He looked at the smear on his fingers for what felt like a full minute. I could see him thinking. I could practically hear him thinking, weighing it, this tiny smudge against the schedule, against the chief pilot who already wanted him gone, against the long list of times being cautious had turned out to be nothing, and made him the punchline of the crew room. He knew exactly what it would cost him to make a fuss over a smear that turned out to be grime. He knew Brant would hear about it by morning. The Falcon delayed a flight over a dirty engine. Classic, he knew. And I watched him decide he didn't care. "Get me a maintenance signature on this seam before we go," he said. "I want eyes on it. If it's residue, fine, sign it off, we fly. But somebody who knows engines looks at this seam first." The ground guy groaned. "Captain, that's gonna be 20 minutes and the company's gonna." "Then it's 20 minutes," Idris said. Quiet, final, not unkind, just a door closing. In the cockpit, drying off, waiting for the maintenance tech, I asked him, "You really think that smear's something?" He was setting up his side, doing it the way he did everything, each switch with intention. He didn't look at me. "Probably not," he said. "Probably it's exactly what he said. Grime. We'll lose 20 minutes and Brant will have a new story for the crew room." "So why?" "It's probably not isn't not." He clicked a switch. "You know how many accidents start with somebody looking at a thing that's probably nothing and being right 99 times, Marco? It's the 100th that buries people. And you don't get to know which number you're on, so you check the seam every time. You check the seam knowing they'll laugh, because the day you stop checking to avoid the laughing is the day you're flying on luck instead of skill." He finally looked at me. "And luck runs out, always, for everybody. The whole job is just refusing to need it." The maintenance tech came aboard 15 minutes later, climbed up to the engine, was up there maybe 10 minutes in the rain. Came back down. Signed the logbook. Said it looked like residual staining from the cleaning, nothing active, no fresh seepage he could find, cleared to dispatch. Idris read the entry twice, then he signed his name under it. I caught the look on his face as he did it. He wasn't relieved. He still didn't like it. But he'd done the thing he'd made them look, and now the responsibility had been shared, the seam had been checked, the box was ticked. He could fly. So we flew. I think about that signature too. I think about how a lesser man, a faster man, a Hale or a Petrov, would never have stopped for that smear at all. Would have walked right past it, the way I did, into the cockpit and into the storm with no one having looked. I think about how thin the line was. 10 minutes of one tired tech's flashlight, that's all that stood between us and not knowing. And it turned out not to be enough to fix anything. The tech missed what was really happening in there. Nobody could have found it on the ramp in the rain. But it mattered anyway. Because it meant that when the moment came, Idris already had it in his head. Number 2 engine. The right one. The one I didn't trust. When you only get a few seconds, The seconds you don't have to spend figuring out what's wrong are the ones that save you. He'd bought himself those seconds standing in the rain over a smear everyone told him to ignore. We pushed back 40 minutes behind schedule. The cabin was about 2/3 full, maybe 60-some passengers back there. I remember the lead flight attendant, a kind woman named Yusra who'd been flying longer than I'd been alive, sticking her head into the cockpit before we taxied. "You two doing okay up here?" she asked. "We're good," Idris said. "Yusra, it's going to be bumpy tonight, real bumpy. I want everybody strapped in early and I want them to stay that way. No service once we're up. Don't let anyone talk you into it." She'd flown with him before. She didn't argue. She just looked at him for a second, and I saw the same thing pass between them that I'd felt out on the ramp, that little cold draft, and she said, "How bumpy are we talking, Idris?" "The kind where I'll be glad I told you early," he said. She nodded once and went back to do her job. No drama, no fear. Two professionals who'd been around long enough to know that the quiet warnings are the ones to listen to. The taxi out was long. The airport was running one runway because of the crosswind, and there was a line of us, a handful of late departures all trying to get out ahead of the worst of the front. I sat there watching the rain hammer the windscreen, the wipers losing the fight, the blue and white runway lights smeared into long streaks of color through the water. The radio was busy, controllers working fast, clipped voices, everyone wanting to go. Idris was very calm. He always was on the ground. He briefed the takeoff again the third time that night, and once again he walked me through the things that could go wrong and what we'd do. Engine failure before V1, reject, stop on the runway. After V1, we go, we fly it, we deal with it in the air, where we'd turn, what altitude we'd clean up at. He made me say it all back. By the third time I knew it cold, which I understand now was the entire point. "You're tired of hearing it," he said, watching me recite. "A little," I admitted. A faint smile. "Good. When you're tired of hearing it, it's finally in there deep enough to be useful." He turned back to the windscreen, to the storm. "The plan you have to think about during the emergency is the plan you'll fumble. The plan that just happens, that's the one that saves you. You don't rise to the occasion, Marco. You sink to your training. So we train, even when it's boring, especially when it's boring." The voice ahead of us cleared the previous aircraft for takeoff. We watched its lights stagger down the runway through the rain and lift off into the murk and vanish almost instantly, swallowed. "Northwind, line up and wait, runway 27. "Line up and wait, 27 Northwind," Idris answered. We rolled onto the runway. The nose came around to point down that long ribbon of lights stretching out into the dark and the rain. The airplane sat there shuddering a little in the wind, like a horse at a gate. I remember the moment so clearly. The rain on the glass, the lights running away from us into the black, Idris's big calm hands resting on the controls, the whole world reduced to this one lit-up strip of wet concrete and the storm waiting at the end of it. "You good?" he asked me. "Good." "Northwind, runway 27, cleared for takeoff. Winds 290 at 25 gusting 38. "Cleared for takeoff 27 Northwind," Idris said. And then to me quietly, just before he pushed the thrust levers up. "Here we go. Eyes outside, mind ahead of the airplane. We brief it, we fly it, we go home." He pushed the levers forward. The engine spooled up. That rising roar you feel in your chest more than here. And the old jet began to roll, and the lights began to blur, and we picked up speed down that runway into the worst night of my life. We had no idea what was waiting for us at 18,000 feet. But Idris, somewhere in the back of that quiet, careful mind, I think he already knew it would be the right engine. The takeoff itself was fine. That's the thing people never expect when I tell this story. They want the disaster to start right there on the runway, all fire and screaming. But it doesn't work like that. The takeoff was clean. The old jet ate up the wet concrete. The speed came up. Idris called it out, 80, V1, rotate. and he eased the nose up and we came off the ground smooth and strong and climbed away into the rain with both engines pulling hard and steady. For about 90 seconds, it was just a normal takeoff in bad weather. Then we hit the cloud. I've flown through a lot of weather in 20 years since. I've been in things that scared me, but I have never before or since flown into anything like that wall we hit at about 4,000 feet that night. IDRIS had called it a wall on the ground, and he'd been exactly right. 1 second we were climbing through ragged, broken cloud, the city lights still smearing below us through the gaps. The next second the world just ended. White, then grey, then black. The windscreen went solid with water, and the airframe got hit by the first real punch of turbulence, and the whole airplane dropped. This gut-lurching fall, and then slammed back up so hard I felt it in my spine. Behind us, through the cockpit door, I heard a few cries from the cabin. Then YUSRA Quotes's voice on the PA, calm as a lake, telling everyone to keep their belts tight. Climb power, keep it coming," IDRIS said. His voice hadn't changed at all. Mine would have shaken, his didn't. "We climb out the top of this. The faster we're through it, the better. Watch your airspeed in the gusts, it's going to jump all over." It did. The airspeed needle was alive, swinging 20, 30 knots up and down as the gusts hit us. Rain turned to a hammering sound that filled the whole cockpit, and then the rain got harder, and then, this is the part that still raises the hair on my arms, then it got quiet. Not silent, but the rain sound changed, softened, got grainy. Ice. We were picking up ice. Anti-ice on all of it, IDRIS said, and I was already reaching for it because for once in my life I was doing exactly what he trained me to do without thinking. Engine anti-ice. Wing, probes, I called each one as I switched it. He acknowledged each one. We were a machine, the two of us, in those minutes. Whatever I'd thought of him on the ground up there in that black soup with the airplane bucking under us, I was so glad, so grateful that it was him in the left seat and not anybody else. We clawed our way up. 8,000, 10, 12. The turbulence didn't quit, but it changed character, less of the gut drops, more of a continuous shaking, a hard buzzing rattle that ran through everything. 12,000, 14. The controller's voice came through, breaking up a little in the weather, handing us off, giving us a higher altitude. IDRIS read it back perfectly. 15,000, 16. And then, at about 17,000 feet, in the middle of all that violence, I felt something that didn't belong. It's hard to explain. When you've flown an airplane long enough, you stop flying it with your eyes and start flying it with your whole body. You feel it through the seat, through the controls, through the soles of your feet. And what I felt for half a second, just a flicker, was a tiny shudder that wasn't the turbulence. A different note in the song. A wrongness underneath all the other wrongness. I almost didn't say anything. I almost told myself it was the storm. But I'd flown with IDRIS enough times by then that some of him had rubbed off on me. Probably not isn't not. IDRIS, I said, did you? Number 2, he said. He'd already felt it. Of course he had. He'd been feeling for it since the ramp, since the smear. While I was wrestling the storm with my eyes glued to the instruments, some part of that man had been sitting quietly with his hand on the controls, waiting, the way the Falcon waits, reading a current the rest of us couldn't even feel. And then the engine let go. I want to slow down here, because what happened next happened in maybe 90 seconds, but those 90 seconds are burned into me frame by frame, and you need to feel them the way we felt them. It didn't explode. People think engines explode. This one didn't. What it did was almost worse. There was a deep grinding bang from the right side, a sound so big it came up through the floor and the seat and my own teeth, and then a horrible shrieking, tearing noise, metal eating itself, and the whole airplane slewed hard to the right and yawed and rolled, and the master warning went off, that loud, urgent, hateful chime, and red lights bloomed across the panel, and then came the smell. Smoke, hot oil, and burning metal, that sharp electrical reek, creeping into the cockpit fast. The airplane was trying to turn itself sideways. With one engine suddenly dead and the other still at climb power, All that thrust on one side wanted to swing us around like a weather vane, and we were doing it in the middle of a storm at 17,000 feet in the dark with ice on the wings and 60-some people behind us. And here is the thing I will remember until I die. Idris Quote's voice did not change. It did not get louder. It did not get faster. It did not crack. In the middle of that noise and those warnings and that smell, his voice came out exactly as level and exactly as calm as it had been on the ground 3 times reading me the takeoff brief, and he said, "I have control. Engine failure number 2. You run the drill, I fly the airplane." And the whole world narrowed down to that calm. I have seen what panic does in a cockpit. I've seen it in the simulator, watched good pilots come apart when 3 things go wrong at once. Panic is loud and fast, and it grabs at everything and accomplishes nothing. What Idris did was the exact opposite of panic. He took that screaming, slewing, burning airplane and he flew it, feet working the rudder hard to kill the yaw, hands easing the wings level, getting the nose where it needed to be. And he did it the way you'd settle a frightened animal. "Slow, sure, I've got you, easy now." "Identify," he said. "Number 2, I said. My voice was not as calm as his, but it was working. The drill was coming up out of me from somewhere deep, from all those boring briefings, from all those times I'd been tired of hearing it. You sink to your training. I was sinking to it. "Number 2 engine confirmed dead, EGT off the scale, no oil pressure. We've got Idris. We've got a fire indication, number 2, fire warning." "Confirmed, number 2. Confirmed, number 2. Fire drill, number 2. Read it, I'll fly." And I ran it. The fire drill. Thrust lever, fuel, the fire bottle. My hands found each thing and Idris confirmed each one before I touched it, confirm. Because the one mistake you can never take back in this moment is shutting down your good engine by accident. And he was not going to let me do it. Not even now. Not even here. He made me confirm the dead one was the dead one before every single action. Exactly the way he drilled it on 100 boring afternoons. The fire bottle fired. We waited. The longest 5 seconds of my life watching that fire light. It went out. The fire light went out. "Fire's out," I said, and I heard the shake in my own voice on those 2 words, the relief almost worse than the fear. "Good," Idris said, just that, good. The same word he'd said when I landed soft in the weather my first day. The same word in the same voice with one engine on fire behind us. Now we have a 1-engine airplane in a thunderstorm, so that's the airplane we fly. Tell me our problems in order. And I want you to understand what he was doing even then, even there. He was teaching. In the worst moment of both our lives, with the smoke still in our throats, he was making me think it through in order, the way you have to, because the 1-engine jet in the storm doesn't care that you're scared. It only cares whether you fly it right. "1," I said, getting a grip. "We're heavy and we just lost half our power. We can't hold this altitude. 2, we're in the storm and we've got ice. 3, and my stomach dropped as I said it, 3, we're over the mountains. There's high ground under us." "There's high ground under us," Idris agreed, like I'd answered a question correctly in a classroom. "So we can't just descend wherever we like. Good, you see the whole picture." Now, that's when the radio came alive. I told you, right at the start, about the silence. Now I'll tell you what came before it. The controller had heard our transponder change. Idris had reached over at some point in all of that, without me even seeing him do it, and dialed in the emergency code, 7700, the 4 digits that light up every radar screen and tell the whole world this aircraft is in trouble. The controller's voice came through, tight and urgent. "Northwind, I'm showing your emergency squawk. Say your situation." And Idris keyed the mic. And in that same impossible calm, with the airplane shuddering on 1 engine in the black, he said, "Northwind has an engine failure, number 2, fire is out. We are single engine, we're heavy, and we cannot maintain altitude. We need vectors to lower terrain and the nearest suitable runway. We have 63 souls on board and a tiny pause, the only one, and we'll need a little patience from everyone tonight. A little patience from everyone tonight. I almost laughed, I almost cried. In the middle of all of it, that was so completely him. What I didn't know, what none of us in that cockpit knew yet, was who was listening. Because the storm had snarled up half the region's traffic that night, and the frequency we were on was packed. Other Northwind aircraft, diverting, holding, picking their way around the weather. And among those voices, somewhere out there in the same black sky, were people who knew exactly who was flying Northwind's stricken jet. Petrov was up there, holding in a stack to the south, waiting out the front. Hale was up there too, further west, on his way to the big carrier interview life he was always talking about, sitting in a jump seat catching a ride. And down in the dark, in the operations building back at base, the chief pilot Brandt had been called in the moment the emergency squawk lit up, and he was standing over the dispatcher's shoulder, headset on, listening to the frequency. Every one of them, every single person who had ever stood in that crew room and said the word Falcon with a sneer in it. They were all, right then, listening to that man's voice come through the storm. Northwind, Roger, Souls and emergency cockpit, the controller said. Turn left heading 240 for lower terrain, descend, and maintain 12,000 when able, expect vectors for the long runway at. And then Idris answered, and the way he answered is the thing I think Petrov never got over. Because the controller had given us a turn and a descent toward lower ground, yes, but Idris, with that map of the terrain already burned into his head from the briefing he'd done while the rest of us groaned, came back instantly. Unable 240, he said. That heading puts us over the ridge line and we can't outclimb terrain on one engine. Give me 270, I'll take the longer way around the high ground. I'd rather be late than low tonight. There was a half-second pause from the controller. Then, Northwind, affirmative 270 approved, you're cleared to deviate as required for terrain and weather. You're the only thing in that block of sky now. You're the only thing in that block of sky now. That was the controller clearing everyone else out of our way. And that was the moment I found out later that the frequency went quiet. Because Petrov heard it. Petrov, holding to the south, heard a single-engine airplane in a thunderstorm get told to turn toward lower terrain by air traffic control, and heard the captain of that crippled jet calmly refuse the controller's heading because he'd already done the terrain math in his head and knew better. Knew that the easy turn would kill us against a mountain, and the hard turn would take us home. Petrov keyed his mic to say something. Some encouragement maybe, some you've got this. And then he told me this himself, years later with his hands shaking around a glass. He stopped. He took his thumb off the button, because he realized there was nothing to say. There was nothing to add. The man flying that airplane did not need a single word from any of them. So Petrov said nothing. And Hale said nothing. And down in operations, Brandt, the man who'd called Idris not the image, who'd wanted him gone, who'd let the joke run for years because Idris cost him minutes. Brandt took off his headset for a second, the dispatcher said, and put his hand over his mouth and just listened. The whole frequency went silent. And the only voice left in all that black sky was the voice of the man they dismissed as a joke, talking his burning, broken airplane down through the storm, one calm word at a time. 270 deviating for terrain Northwind, Idris said, and then to me in the same breath in the same voice. Okay, Marco, the hard part's behind us. The engine's done what it's going to do. Now we just fly a careful airplane to a long runway. You with me? I looked at him, smoke still hanging faint in the cockpit, one engine dead, the mountains below us in the dark, the storm all around, and his big calm hands on the controls and his steady eyes already looking ahead past the fear to the runway none of us could see yet. I'm with you, I said. Good, said the Falcon. Then let's go home. Flying a jet on one engine isn't like driving a car with a flat tire. It's not just slower and careful. It's a different airplane. Everything you knew about it changes. You've lost half your power, so you can't climb worth anything and you have to fight just to hold what you've got. The dead engine drags like an anchor on one side, so you're standing on the rudder constantly to keep the nose straight. Idris had his right foot pressed down hard the whole time, hour after it felt like, though it was really only minutes. The systems that engine used to feed are gone or running off backups. And on top of all that night, we still had the storm. We still had ice. We still had the mountains under us in the dark. So that's what we flew. That's the airplane we had, so that's the airplane we flew. The turn to 270 took us the long way around the high ground, exactly like Idris had said. I watched the terrain on the screen slide past underneath us, those tight orange contour lines showing the ridge we would have flown into if we'd taken the controller's first heading, and I felt sick looking at them. We cleared it by a margin I don't like to think about even now, but we cleared it, because one man had spent 20 boring minutes studying the chart while the rest of us wanted to go. Coming up on 12,000, I said, want me to level off? Let it down to 10 if the controller will give it to us, Idris said. Lower air's warmer, we'll shed some of this ice, and I want to be below the worst of the weather before we set up for the approach. Ask him. I asked. The controller gave us 10. We eased down, and as we came down out of the worst of it, the airframe stopped its constant hard buzzing, and the rain on the glass turned back from that grainy ice sound into honest water. Some of the ice came off the wings, you could hear it, chunks of it breaking loose and rattling back along the fuselage, a sound like someone throwing gravel at the airplane. Each chunk that came off was weight we didn't have to carry on half power. Each chunk was a small mercy. There, Idris said, feeling it through the controls the way he felt everything. She's flying better already. Good girl. He said that good girl to the airplane, quiet, almost to himself. I don't think he knew he'd said it out loud. In 20 years, I've never forgotten it. The man had more tenderness for that broken jet in that moment than most people have for anything. But we weren't out of it, not even close. Here's the thing about a single-engine approach in weather. It's the most dangerous part of the whole emergency, and it comes at the end, when you're already exhausted and your nerves are shot. The engine failure itself is loud and fast and over in seconds. The approach is slow. It's a long, patient, grinding thing, and it gives you 1,000 chances to make the one mistake that undoes everything. And our problems kept stacking up. First, the airport. The long runway Idris wanted, the one with the best length and the best approach for our situation, was still socked in with the worst of the front. The weather there was right down on the minimums, the very edge of what we were legally and physically able to attempt. The controller offered us a closer field with better weather but a shorter runway. Idris thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. We'll take the long runway, he said. Shorter field, single engine, heavy, wet runway, gusting crosswind, no. I want every foot of concrete I can get tonight. We'll fly the harder approach to the better runway. I'd rather fight the weather than run out of pavement. I'd have probably grabbed at the closer airport, the good weather, the relief of getting down sooner, and it might have been fine. But might have been fine is exactly the kind of thinking Idris had spent his whole career refusing. He didn't fly on might. He looked at the shorter runway wet with a crosswind on one engine, and he saw the corner of it where things could go wrong, and he simply declined to put us in that corner. Late, not low. Long, not short. Skill, not luck. Then the second engine started acting up. Not failing God, not failing, I don't think I could have stood it. But the number one engine, the good one, the only one we had, started running a little hot. The temperature crept up. Just a little. Just enough. We'd been running it hard at high power for a long time to make up for its dead twin, and it was tired, and it was telling us so. I saw the temperature and my blood went cold. Idris, number one's running warm, EGT's climbing. He looked at it. One long look. And I watched him do the math. If we bobbied the good engine and pulled the power back to keep it cool, We'd have even less performance, even less margin, on an approach where we already had almost none. But if we kept the power up to fly the approach properly and the good engine cooked itself, then we'd have no engines in a storm near the ground, and that's not an emergency anymore, that's just falling. Okay, he said, calm, always calm. Here's what we do. We fly this approach in one shot, no second tries. We don't have a second engine's worth of margin to go around and try again, so we don't plan to. We set up perfect, we fly it perfect, we land the first time. Brief it with me, right now. And we briefed it, one more time, the last time, the most important time, every step of the approach, every speed, every gate, what we'd do if this or that, who'd call what. And then, and this is the part, he said. And Marco, if at any point I'm not flying it right, you tell me. You take it if you have to, I trust you. You've got good hands. You proved that your first day. Don't let me kill us being proud. Deal. That captain, the best stick I ever flew with, would say that to a 26-year-old kid in that moment. Don't let me kill us being proud. I have tried to be that kind of man ever since. I have mostly failed, but I try because of that sentence. Deal, I said. The approach. I'm not going to be able to make you feel it the way I felt it. There's no words for the inside of those last few minutes, but I'll try. We came around onto the final approach course in the murk, the airplane heavy and tired and held together by one hot engine and one man's hands. The controller handed us to the tower. We configured flaps coming out slow, one notch at a time, each notch a fresh fight against the drag, Idris feeding in power and rudder to keep us steady. The gear came down with a heavy thump and lock, and the drag jumped again, and the good engine ran a little hotter for it. Gear down 3 green, I said. Flaps set, speeds good, we're configured. We're configured, Idris confirmed. Landing checklist. We ran it down through the cloud, 2,000 feet, the rain hammering, the airplane shaking in the gusts, 1,500. The crosswind trying to push us off the center line, Idris correcting, never overcorrecting, those big calm hands making 100 tiny inputs a second without ever once looking rushed. 1,000 feet, still in cloud, still nothing out the window but gray and rain. 500, I called, still no runway. Keep looking, Idris said. We've got till minimums. We fly it down to the numbers, and if we don't see it, we... Minimums, called the automated voice. The decision height. The point where you either see the runway and land, or you don't and you go around, except we'd already agreed we had no go-around in us tonight. Not really, not on that hot engine. And for one heartbeat, one single, endless heartbeat, there was nothing out the window. I felt my whole body go to ice. And then the rain tore for a second and the lights came up out of the murk. The approach lights, then the runway, that beautiful, beautiful long ribbon of it, lit up and streaming with water, but there, dead ahead, exactly where Idris had put us. Not left, not right. Dead ahead. He'd flown a single-engine instrument approach in a storm by hand on a tired engine and put us right on the center line at minimums like he was threading a needle. Runway in sight, I called, and my voice broke on it. Continuing, Idris said, calm, calm, landing. The last 100 feet. The crosswind was vicious right down on the deck, trying to throw us sideways into the grass. Idris worked the controls, dropping the upwind wing into the wind, holding the nose straight with the rudder, that classic crosswind landing they teach you on day one, and almost nobody flies perfectly when it actually counts. He flew it perfectly. The upwind main wheel touched first, just kissed the wet concrete, then the other. Then the nose came down gentle as you like. And we were down, we were rolling, we were on the ground, spray exploding off the wheels, the reverser roaring on the one good engine, Idris standing on the brakes, the runway lights flashing past slower and slower and slower. And then we were stopped on the runway in the rain, in the dark, in one piece. 63 souls, 2 pilots, 1 dead engine, 1 hot one, and not a scratch on any of us. For a second neither of us moved. Neither of us said anything. The rain drummed on the roof. The good engine ticked and whined as it spooled down, and then in the cabin behind us, through the cockpit door, we heard it start, a sound I will hear on my deathbed, I think. Applause. 60-some terrified people who'd felt that bang and smelled that smoke and ridden that storm down in the dark, all of them clapping and crying and some of them praying out loud, all because of the man in the left seat. Idris let out one long breath, the only sign in the whole thing that he was human and had been afraid too, just one breath. Then he keyed the mic and in that same calm voice he said, "Tower, Northwind is down and stopped. We'll need a tug and the fire trucks to walk us in, but everyone's okay. Thank you for the help tonight." And the tower controller, a professional, a man who'd kept his own voice steady through the whole thing to help us, the tower controller keyed up to answer and his voice cracked, just for a word. "Northwind," he said, "that was," and he stopped and started again, "welcome down. Nice flying. Welcome down." The fire trucks came out with their lights spinning red and blue through the rain. They walked us into the gate, and as we taxied, slow, on one engine, past the windows of the terminal, I looked over at Idris. He wasn't celebrating, he wasn't shaking. He was already filling in the logbook, writing it down, engine number 2, the exact time, the fire, the fuel state, all of it in his careful hand, the same way he wrote everything. The man had just flown the impossible, and he was doing the paperwork. "You okay?" I asked him. He finished a line, capped his pen, and then he looked over at me, and for the first time all night the calm cracked just a little, and underneath it I saw how tired he was, how old, how much that had taken out of him that he'd never once let me see while it counted. "I'm okay, Marco," he said quietly. "We checked the seam, you remember, on the ramp, we checked the seam." He almost smiled. "Wasn't enough to fix it, but it meant I knew where to look." He looked out at the rain, knowing where to look. That's the whole job in the end. That's all the Falcon's really doing up there, just knowing where to look. And then he opened his door and went back to check on his passengers, every single one of them by hand, before he'd let himself rest. But the story isn't over, because the next morning every person who had ever laughed at the name Falcon had to walk into that crew room and face him. And what happened in there, Petrov and Hale and Brandt and the rest of us and me, especially me, that's the part I really came here to tell you. I didn't sleep that night. You'd think after something like that your body would just shut down. Mine wouldn't. We got the passengers off, we did the debriefs, we filled out the mountain of paperwork and emergency generates, and by the time I got to the hotel it was almost 4 in the morning. I lay on top of the covers with my flight suit still on and stared at the ceiling and watched it all play again, over and over. The bang, the smoke, the mountains in the dark, his voice, "I have control," the runway coming up at minimums. "Welcome down." And under all of it churning was a different feeling, an ugly one, shame. Because I kept seeing the crew room. I kept seeing Petrov doing his impression, the flapping arms, the "I am the Falcon," and I kept hearing myself laughing. I kept seeing all the times I'd let the word go by. All the small chances to say knock it off, the man's a better pilot than any of us, and how I'd let every single one of them pass because it was easier to belong than to be decent. I'd flown a perfect emergency beside the best captain I'd ever known, and all I could feel was the weight of every time I'd helped make him the joke. Around dawn, I gave up on sleep and went down to the lobby, and I found Idris already there. Of course he was, always early. He had a coffee in front of him, a real cup, not paper. He'd somehow charmed the front desk into a real mug, and he was reading something. Just sitting there in the gray morning light by the window, calm as ever, like he hadn't done anything remarkable at all. Like the night before had been a Tuesday. I sat down across from him. I didn't know what to say, so I said the thing that was on me. "Idris, I owe you an apology." He looked up. "For what? You flew well last night, better than well." "Not for last night," I made myself say it. "For the crew room, for all of it, the name, the laughing. I never said it to you, I never did the impression, but I laughed when the others did, and I never once told them to stop, and that's the same thing. That's worse maybe. I knew. I'd flown with you. I knew what you were and I laughed anyway because I wanted to fit in. And I'm sorry. I've been sorry a long time and I was too much of a coward to say it until you saved my life." He was quiet for a while. He looked at me with those steady dark eyes, and then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled, a real one, the realest I'd seen. "You know why I never minded the name," he said. "Because it doesn't touch you. I figured that out a while ago." "No, it touched me." He turned his coffee mug slowly on the table. "It touched me plenty, Marco. The first few years it touched me a lot. I'd go home and it would sit on me. A man tells the truth about himself, the realest thing in him, the Falcon, the thing his father showed him as a boy, and a room full of people laughs at it. That hurts. Don't ever let anyone tell you that kind of thing doesn't hurt." He took a sip. "But here's what I learned. They weren't laughing at me. Not really. They were laughing at the part of themselves that wanted to be patient and careful and good, and couldn't, because being careful is boring and slow and nobody claps for it. Every time they laughed at the Falcon, they were really laughing at the better pilot they were too impatient to become. So I let them laugh, and I kept checking my seams, and I figured one day the airplane would settle the argument better than I ever could." He set the mug down. "Last night," he said, "the airplane settled the argument. We flew the empty repositioning leg back to base that afternoon, the two of us in a different aircraft. Ours was going nowhere for a long time, surrounded by investigators. It was a strange, quiet flight. Clear skies, the storm long gone, the world washed clean. Neither of us talked much. We didn't need to. The crew room was waiting. I've replayed walking into that room 1,000 times, because it was full. Word travels fast in an airline, faster than any airplane, and by the time we landed, everyone knew. Everyone had heard the recording or heard about it. The whole frequency going silent. Idris refusing the controller's heading because he'd done the terrain math. The landing at minimums on one hot engine. Everyone knew. So the room was full and the room was silent when Idris walked in. Petrov was there. The big captain, the ringleader, the man who'd kept the name alive for years. He was standing by the coffee machine, and when Idris came through the door, Petrov set his cup down, and for a second nobody moved. And then Petrov crossed the room. This huge man, who I'd never seen do anything quietly in my life, walked across that crew room in total silence, and he stood in front of Idris, and his face, I'll never forget Petrov's face. It was the face of a man who has just understood something 20 years too late. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. "Idris," he managed, and then his voice went. The big laugh was gone. He just stood there and his eyes filled up and he said, barely a whisper, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. All those years, I'm sorry." And Idris, God, this man Idris reached out and put one of those big calm hands on Petrov's shoulder, the same hands that had flown us through the storm, and he said, gently, "It's all right, Yuri." First time I ever heard him use Petrov's first name. "It's all right. We're all still learning the air. We're all still learning the air." Petrov broke, right there. This mountain of a man, crying in the crew room, and Idris holding his shoulder and telling him it was all right. Hale was different. Hale, the young, sharp, ambitious one, the one who'd called Idris old man, who flew like he was always being watched. Hale didn't cry. Hale just couldn't look at him. He sat in the corner with his head down, and when Idris passed near him, Hale said, very low, not really looking up, "The jet doesn't know it's new." It was the thing Idris had said to him months before that nobody understood. The jet doesn't know it's new. Meaning, all your speed, all your fast hands, all your fancy talk about the modern airplanes, none of it matters when something breaks, because the laws of flying don't care about your image. They only care whether you're ready. Hale had finally understood it. He'd stayed up all night. I found out later, listening to the recording of that approach over and over, and somewhere in there he'd finally understood it. Idris stopped by his chair. "You'll be a good captain someday, Hale," he said. "You've got the hands. Now you've just got to get the patience to go with them. It's the harder half. Most people never bother. You can if you decide to. Hale nodded, still not looking up. But he nodded. And I heard, years later, that Hale became exactly the kind of careful, patient, slow checklist captain that he'd once mocked. That he ran the most boring, most thorough cockpit in whatever big carrier he ended up at. That young first officers grumbled about how slow he was. I like to think Idris would have laughed at that. The good kind of laugh. And then there was Brandt, the chief pilot, the man who'd called Idris not the image. The man who'd wanted him pushed into early retirement because he cost the company minutes. Brandt was standing at the back of the room. He'd been the one listening in operations, the one who took off his headset and put his hand over his mouth. And now he had to walk forward in front of everyone and face the man he'd been trying to get rid of. He cleared his throat. He was holding a piece of paper. "Idris," he said, and his voice was not steady. "The company wants to. There's going to be a commendation, the highest one we give, and the regulator's going to want." He stopped, crumpled the paper a little in his hand, and then he set the official words aside and he said the real ones. "I was wrong about you. I've been wrong about you for years. I called you slow. I said things. And last night you saved 63 people on an airplane I would have signed off without a second look at that engine. You saw it, on the ramp, in the rain. You made them check and everyone told you not to, and I'd have been one of the people telling you not to." He shook his head. "I don't have the right to ask you anything, but I'd be honored if you'd stay, as long as you want, and I'd be honored if you'd help me teach the rest of them to fly like you do." The room was dead silent. And Idris looked at Brandt for a long moment, and he didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't list all the times he'd been right. He just nodded slow and he said, "I'll stay and I'll teach, but I'll tell you the only thing I know how to teach, and it isn't flying." He looked around the room then, at Petrov, at Hale, at me, at all of us, every one of us who'd laughed. Check your seams, even when they laugh, especially when they laugh. The day you stop checking the small thing because you're afraid of looking foolish is the day you start flying on luck. And luck, he paused, and I swear the whole room leaned in, luck runs out. For everybody. The whole job, the whole life, is just refusing to need it. He flew for 11 more years after that night. He never got the name Falcon said at him with a sneer again. It became something else entirely. New first officers would come in, hear the story, and ask to fly with him. "Please, can I get a trip with the Falcon?" And they meant it like a prayer. The name flipped completely. The joke became the honor. By the end, getting a pairing with Idris Kamara was the most coveted thing at that little regional airline, and pilots would trade away good trips just to sit in the right seat next to him for 2 days and try to soak up whatever it was he had. He retired quiet the way he did everything. Washed his coffee cup one last time, put it on the shelf, shook every hand in the room, and went home to wherever it was he went home to. I was a captain myself by then. I flew his last leg with him in the right seat where I'd started. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. At the gate he looked over at me and said, "You've got good hands, Marco. You always did. Now make sure you've got the patience." Same thing he'd told Hale. The harder half. He passed a few years ago. I was at the service. So was Petrov, old and gray now, who cried again, the same as that morning in the crew room. So were dozens of pilots, captains all over the world by now, who'd flown beside him and carried a piece of him into every cockpit they ever sat in. The man who barely spoke, who had no time for stories, ended up living inside hundreds of other people's hands on the controls. That's a kind of immortality most loud men never get. I've told this story a lot of times now. To young pilots mostly. To my own first officers, when they're tired of hearing me brief the same thing 3 times, when I catch them skipping the bottom of the checklist when they think I'm not watching. I tell them about the smear on the cowling in the rain, and the man who stopped to check it while everyone groaned. And I always end it the same way. With the thing I understood, finally, lying awake that night with my flight suit still on. They dismissed him as a joke because being careful looks like weakness, right up until the one moment it's the only thing standing between you and the ground. They laughed at the Falcon hanging still in the wind, looking like he wasn't doing anything at all because they couldn't see that hanging still, reading the air, knowing where to look, is the hardest thing in the sky. Any fool can dive. It takes a master to wait. The engine failure didn't silence them because it was loud. It silenced them because, for the first time in that quiet, calm voice coming through the storm, every one of them finally heard what patience sounds like when everything else has fallen apart. And there was nothing left to laugh at. There was only a falcon, folding his wings at last, dropping out of the dark exactly when it mattered, and carrying all 63 of us safely home.